Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Finding and Applying for Academic Jobs workshop. This event is organized by the Opportunity Network for At-Risk Writers, Artists, Rights Defenders, and Scholars, also known by the acronym ONWARDS. My name is Carly O'Connell, and I am the Partnerships and Communications Analyst at the IIE Scholar Rescue Fund, which arranges, funds, and supports higher education fellowships for threatened and displaced scholars who've been outside of their home country for less than 2 years. I'm delighted to see a number of our fellows on the call, and of course, two of our speakers, Azat and Zuhal, are also alumni of the program. I'm a proud member of the Onwards working group that arranges these workshops, and I will be moderating today's session. So Onwards is a collaborative effort by civil society groups, including Scholar Rescue Fund and a number of other organizations that support displaced people who have located to the US from around the world. We've listened to your worries about how to continue to support yourself and your family in safety after your fellowship or residency ends, as too often the causes that force you to leave your home doesn't resolve itself within the time of a 1 or 2 year fellowship. So our workshops are designed to bring you knowledge from experts in the fields of the topic areas and bring you hope from hearing from others who've been in your shoes and found their way. Today's topic is applying for academic jobs, and it's the third workshop in our series. You can find recordings and notes from our previous 2 workshops on the Onwards website, onwardsproject.org, as well as register for our upcoming workshop on finding non-academic jobs. And more workshops will be announced soon. Our previous workshops were on the US healthcare system and on visas and legal questions. So do check out our website for notes and recordings from those workshops. Finding a job in the US, especially in a field as competitive as academia, is challenging even for people who are born and raised in the US context. And there are additional barriers for people who are displaced here from other national academies. So I want to acknowledge that you're not alone if you're struggling, and we're here to connect you with peers and resources. You can leave your video on or off as you're comfortable. Feel free to edit your name if you would prefer to remain anonymous. Today's presentations will be recorded, except for the small group discussions at the end, where we will stop the recording for your privacy. And the recording, the PowerPoint, and other notes and resources will be posted to our website, onwardsproject.org, in the coming weeks. Please direct all questions to the Q&A function on Zoom throughout the presentation, and we'll have a short time frame after each of the 2 main presentation sections to go through some of those questions in the Q&A function, and then we'll have time in the final half hour of our 2-hour session for discussion. Please remain mute until that small group discussion section. So like I said, we have scheduled this for 2 hours. We will do our best not to run over time, but there is always a possibility that may happen. So if you have to duck off at the 2-hour mark, do know that, well, I guess the rest of the webinar will be recorded, but the small group discussions will not at the end. So that's enough from me. And let's hear brief introductions from each of today's speakers. Why don't you take 30 seconds to introduce yourself, Valerie?
Hi, I'm Valerie Sutton, and I am an expert on career theory and coaching theory. I have worked primarily with master and doctoral level students in the academic job search. I've worked in all types of universities. So most recently, I was at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, but I've worked at state institutions as well as private universities. I'm excited to be here because this is really a passion for me, is making sure that everybody feels welcome and that they know how to navigate the US system.
Great. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Libal. I'm an associate professor in social work and human rights at the University of Connecticut. I direct the Gladstein Family Human Rights Institute, and I've been the main SAR liaison and program director for SAR for about 14 years. And like Valerie, I'm really passionate to work in this space and to build especially mentor and mentorship teams for the colleagues that are in residence at the university, as well as ideally to expand the number of opportunities that are available, not only in the US, but within the broader network for more durable opportunities for our artists, our scholars, and our practitioners. So I'm really honored to be here today.
Thanks, Kathy. Raza?
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. My name is Raza Rumi, and I am currently the Distinguished Lecturer in Human Rights at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute, affiliated with CUNY. I'm also the outgoing director of Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, and I've been teaching at the Brooks School of Public Policy, the MPA program, for the past 7 years. I also happen to be a journalist and a writer, so I have sort of multiple identities, and hopefully I'll get to talk about them when we come to different sub-themes of this wonderful workshop.
Thanks, Raza. Azat?
Hello, everyone. My name is Azat Gundogan. I'm an urban sociologist by training with a background in political science. I was an IIE Scholar Rescue Fund Fellow in 2016 at Cornell's Einadi Center and in 2017 at Florida State University's Sociology Department. I am currently based at Florida State University, furthering my teaching and research as an associate teaching professor in the University Honors Program. And I'm also affiliated with Sociology Department at FSU. It's great to be here today. I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences.
And last but not least, Zuhal.
Hello, everyone. I am Zuhal Yilmaz. I am a mathematics educator with a diverse international background from my experience in US, in Finland, Turkey, and Cyprus. And I would be happy to be here. And I am currently program evaluation lead at Louisiana State University. Will be joining North Carolina State University College of Education at the end of this month. And I am also serving as a board director for Human Migration Institute in California, where I was a Scholar Rescue Fund in University of California, Riverside. We started this initiative, which is focusing on empowering immigrants and refugee individuals and creating community for them. And also I am serving as a lead for international math educators under the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators to create network for international math educators in my field. And I am happy to be here and looking forward to sharing my experiences with you all as well.
Great, thanks so much. I will turn it over to Valerie to kick off our workshop.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carly. So we're going to talk about finding and applying for academic jobs. And this can be a very confusing process because of our educational system in the United States. So Carly, if you want to flip to the first slide, I'll just give you a brief overview of what that kind of looks like. So when we're looking at higher education institutions, of course, there's private education, which includes the Ivy Leagues. There are private liberal arts colleges. There are private universities. Most of these are in the nonprofit area. And this is important to understand because there's also for-profit education, which is like Capella University, Strayer University, Phoenix, and all of those have academic positions, but it means something different when you're looking at the visa situation. And then we have public higher education. So that's including community colleges and state systems of education. So within the public and the private nonprofit institutions, this is where it's much easier to get a visa, depending on what type of visa that you're on and your work status at this point in time. But what these organizations fall under is they do not fall under the cap if you are looking at the H-1B visa. So which this means is they have capacity to sponsor many different types of visas, or whether it's H1 or J1 or other types of visa. They have people in place that understand the legal system to be able to do that. Now, the second piece of that is the willingness to work with somebody that is not from the US and has some of these visa issues, right? And so sometimes a university is willing to do it, and sometimes they're not. So I always talk about Harvard because I worked there for a very long time. And so when it came down to faculty, they were absolutely, they had the capacity and they were willing to sponsor the visa. However, when it got to master level positions that may have been just a research position, let's say, or it could have been in student affairs or operations, they were not willing to sponsor, even though they had the capacity. So it's just important to understand capacity and willingness and at what level they're willing to make that sponsorship. So I bring this about. The second thing is federal regulations come into this a little bit too when posting jobs. So the one thing that I recommend everyone do here is create a list of target higher education institutes that you're interested in, and set up a job search agent on their site, because depending on the level of position, they don't have to post it anywhere else but their site. So you might not learn about a job unless you're going to their particular site. So Harvard, you can go in, you can register, and you can set up search agents for the professor role, whatever that might be. And that's definitely the best way to find out about jobs, is those target organizations. If you want to hop to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you need in this process. So depending on the type of position, so there's lots of positions in universities that you are highly qualified for. And so you look at, a lot of people are looking at the faculty positions. Now, when you look at that timeline, you're looking at it being about 9 months, because it's going to start in the summer and early fall for the application process. And the reason that it's so long is that higher education, of course, is decision by consensus making. So you have a search committee. You're going to have to do presentations beyond just submitting your resume and CV. You're going to go through multiple rounds of interviews. And then, of course, they're going to have to process you through the paperwork and through the reference checks and those types of things. So it does take a very long time to do this. So the earlier you can start this, and the timing really is at the end of summer and the early fall. You might find a few that are a little bit later, like if they got budget funding for something. So budgets usually run January to for submission of budgets with the if there's an approval for a new professorship, it comes in July. So there might be a chance that they post something earlier, or a search fails and they repost it. But for the most part, that's what it is. Then you also have research centers, and this is where you might have a principal investigator or a research associate, those types of things that align well with folks that have their PhDs. These are usually 6 to 9 months, but they'll run throughout the year, because what happens is a lot of these are grant funded positions. And so, as soon as they get the grant, then they start advertising for the research associates, research managers, those types of roles. We also have a lot of student affairs positions. Now, these are 60 to 90 days. They're much quicker, but it's really supporting the students. So it might be a fellowship program. It might be some other type of program that is supporting students. These positions really start posting May through July, because a lot of people leave at the end of the academic year, as well as our budgets are approved in around the March timeframe with a July start date. So we start hiring at that time. And then finally, there are the operation positions. So those are like finance, it might be marketing, communications, anything that supports the university. And so what you're looking for there is, it's again 60 to 90 days, but the applications happen throughout the year. So somebody might leave their position in September, and so they post for that position at that time. So it's just important to understand what role that you're focusing on, and time that appropriately. Now, all three of those positions that are at the research center, student affairs, and operations, those might be a plan B to get into a university at your level, but you're focusing on your plan A of the faculty position. So it's just a matter of like prioritizing your application process and understanding where you want to apply. And if you want to jump to the next slide. We're going to talk about what you need for each of these roles. So with a faculty, you're really going to need a PhD to get that sponsorship. And the curriculum vitae is very, very important, along with publications. Now, there are two other types of roles within a faculty, and that's lecturers and professors of practice. So those are people that have a lot of experience in a particular area, but professors of practice usually fall into major universities, and that could be public or it could be private, but those are your Ivy Leagues and state institutions. But these are people that are really well known that don't necessarily have their PhD, but they have 20 to 25 years of experience. A CV is still needed, not as much around the publications. And then when you get into community colleges and the state colleges, a lot of times there are adjunct faculty positions. And if you're looking for something short term to get you some experience in the US, oftentimes those are an option. Now, in research centers, if you have your PhD, this is where principal investigators are often hired to run the center. And these are people that really have an in-depth background in research. And again, it will be a curriculum vitae versus a resume. Again, publications are essential in that, but you will also find a lot of roles under that which fall under research. And those only require a master's degree, and those typically have a resume. Although it's a 2-page resume, it's not as heavy on publications or presentations in this case. Then finally, or the last two, it's just looking at resumes and cover letters. Student affairs is master's degree preferred, but not always required, depending on the level, and the same with the operations piece of things. So those are some of the materials and credentials. One thing I want to cover is a lot of times credentials don't come. So I have worked with scholars at risk before, and I've had folks that have had trouble getting their credentials, the PhD and the transcripts and those types of things that are needed in the application process into the US. And so in that case, you might have to think about your plan B until you can get the credentials or work through that credential process. And I'll go to the last slide, and then I really want to get people's actual experiences because I think this is more valuable, and I'll take some questions. But there are a lot of cultural differences when it comes to submitting these types of materials. So one of the things about the US is we're a very low context culture, which means that we get to the point very quickly. We don't need a lot of context in things. So a lot of times I'm working on, let's say I'm working on a resume with somebody versus a CV. And they're going at length. Like I've worked on folks' resumes that are 5 pages long. And I'm like, that just doesn't happen in the US. And a lot of the positions that you might be applying to are, in operations are 1 page, and in student affairs, it might be 2 pages, but you really want to get to the point very quickly with your bullet points and focus on the specific language in your cover letters. That is generally for student affairs, and for operations 1 page. For a faculty position, that will often be 2 pages, and it might include like your teaching philosophy and your research background. We also have a low power distance, which means that you can reach out to anybody because networking is essential in the job search in the US. And so you should not hesitate to reach out to a dean or a president of a university to really just get to know them because we don't have that hierarchy here. And so I've had, folks reach out to me and I'm like, yeah, of course I will talk to you. And I don't have that problem with reaching it as a director of talking to somebody that's an entry-level career person. And I always give this story. I was working at the Fox School of Business, and I was working with a graduate student in the MBA program. And I said, reach out to the CEOs of pharmaceutical companies. And she was aghast. She's like, I have 2 years of experience and I'm getting my MBA. And I said, just here's how you frame the conversation. And she had 3 of the CEOs reach out to her, and she landed an internship with one of them. And it was a huge pharmaceutical company. So I like to give that example because we do have that low power distance. I do want to mention, we do have federal regulations for search. So one of the most important things you can do when you're looking at a job description is look at the basic requirements. Those basic requirements must be in your resume for you to be called into the interview. So I see a lot of folks that don't include them in their resume, even though they have them. And I can't call you in. And even if you corrected that resume and you resubmitted, I can't look at it because there are federal regulations. I would literally have to close down my search, reopen it, and have everyone else reapply to the search to even consider you. So make sure you get those basic qualifications. If it requires a PhD, make sure that you have the PhD on there. If it requires some kind of certification, make sure you have that certification on there. But you really, a lot of times it'll say demonstrated experience in a particular area. Make sure that you put that in there because that is a federal regulation. Second quick tip, and this isn't necessarily federal regulations, but apply within the first 10 days of a position opening. Because one of the things is we can keep positions open until we fill the position, right? But if you don't apply within the first 10, if I get enough qualified candidates in there, I'm going to call those qualified candidates and start the interview process, and I will never go back to my resume pool. And if I fill the position, then you're just sitting in the waiting pool, right? And so you really want to be the first. And that's why I'm a big fan of job search agents right on the university or college's sites that you're looking for. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the emotional challenges because you'll get ghosted. I'm a big LinkedIn advocate, and I see in there where sometimes there's 700 applicants for a position and you just never hear back from them, right? And so you want to know that it's not you, and it is the process. But the more that you can network, the better the experience is going to be for you because you're going to hear a lot of the positive reactions to your experience and your background. It can be really frustrating because of the long timelines it is to search because, I've worked with many folks from outside of the United States, and they think that it should be almost immediate. And when they find out these searches take 3 to 6 to 9 months to finish, it can be frustrating. So making sure that that project management and time management is essential and that it is a long time period. And then, of course, there's anxiety. And this is where I talk a lot about a plan B. So you might not get your plan A positions, but if you can think about your working identity, so I talk about your passion, where your loves are, the skills that you want to use, the work culture you would most thrive in, and life needs. A lot of times it's coming from life needs that you need to make a salary, you need to get benefits. And so if you can align a job with one of those 2 other areas so that it will get you to plan A, so that you at least get your salary and your benefits, that helps to ease the anxiety so that you're on solid ground. And then you can work your way up in the US and you can build a plan from there. So those are my talking points very quickly and some quick tips. And I believe that we have, I think it's Raza that's going to talk to this topic right now.
Thank you so much, Valerie. You've covered so much ground and, so many excellent points. I mean, I can only relate my personal experience. I think, I've been able to secure both academic and non-academic jobs within higher education. So I think 3 things I wish to emphasize. I mean, the first is, of course, as you rightly said, keeping an eye, setting up job agents and noting what is out there in the market. I mean, I think that is something really, I just cannot, emphasize it more. Because sometimes, jobs are posted, they are posted on different sort of portals, and you may or may not know about them. And then you miss the deadline. And I did it myself a couple of times. And so I think that being alert is very important. Secondly, reaching out. I think this is the most amazing thing about in general, the US culture, but particularly in higher education, where sort of hierarchies are not really encouraged or observed. And you can certainly write to deans or professors or even, staff members who are responsible for recruitment processes. And you also learn a lot whether you are eligible, about your eligibility. And I think I can say that 10 times I wrote, at least 9 times I got a response, sometimes favorable, sometimes not so favorable. So I think reaching out is most important because you get to know exactly what the institution is looking for. And I think the third important part is that I will talk about it later as well, is that don't be sort of limited to applying for an academic or teaching job, because there are many supposedly staff or non-academic jobs that also involve teaching and research. So I call them hybrid positions. Different institutions use different labels for them. So for example, at Ithaca College, when I applied for this job of directing a center for independent media, one of its requirements was teaching every semester. And that not just enabled me to bring in my own experience and my own ideas about teaching, but also open doors for research and collaboration across different schools. So seemingly, I mean, technically it's a staff job, but it's on the cusp. It's both faculty. So I'm part of faculty. I was part of faculty and part of the staff as well. So there are, and almost all private colleges and even public sector universities, I noticed that there are similar positions open. So sometimes it is very, very a lot of people, who have done their PhDs and postdocs and have done publishing in their home countries, and they feel, oh, I must not apply for the staff position. But, I think one great way is to find your entry point. And I think that's my biggest lesson is that, if you are stuck, I mean, I chose higher education when I came to the US. Initially, I was working for a think tank for 1.5 years. But, I realized that that's not where I wanted to be. And so I was searching and hunting for academic jobs and found through different networks and through Scholars at Risk network, and then the Ithaca Society of Asylum and other networks, they helped me connect with institutions. And once I wanted my foot in the door, put the proverbial one.
Thank you so much, Raza.
Yes, thank you.
Zuhal, did you have anything you wanted to add about, preparing materials, credentials for the job hunt?
So Raza, you made a really important point, because in my early appointment at University of California, Riverside, I started to apply, long-term positions. And in my early interviews, they asked about my teaching experience. And most of my teaching experience was not in United States. And this became like a challenge in the interview process, because they were specifically asking for teaching experience at higher education level. And my position was mainly focusing on research. And I reached out to the Dean of the Faculty of Education, which is kind of like reaching out to the right people in the space and share my experiences with them, and to be able to teach course at University of California, Riverside. So experiencing a challenge, and at the same time actively trying to take initiative and reaching out to people to be able to process these challenges and navigate through these challenges. Then I reach out a colleague at NYU and part-time teach at NYU. And after those teaching experiences, it is easy to communicate about my rich background in international settings and how those perspectives is also helping me teaching in US settings become a powerful tool for me in the international in the interview process. And it is not just a defect anymore, it is becoming like a strength, because understanding the inclusion and diversity in different settings and to be able to transfer into the US setting. And the other thing after this, when you become in a position, especially the people who are able to find their ways in the academia, coming from similar backgrounds as we are, advocating for how the job postings are being framed in the university, it is another thing. Because when they say teaching experience in US, it is basically automatically make you disqualified for the position. And one instance that I can share with in my university, we change it teaching experience in this field rather than in US education setting. So that's also another thing that I would like to share with the people. You can advocate for by reaching out to people's mentors that you have in the field who may have a say in the job posting in the process in the universities.
Great. That's very insightful, Zuhal. Azat, I think you had some more comments on the emotional challenges and cultural challenges.
Yes, thank you. I find this topic, issue, emotional challenges issue very pressing, actually, because as you dive into the academic scene in the US, folks like us who have had to leave their home countries, tackle a bunch of tough challenges, it's been extremely difficult for all of us, right? So these difficulties take a huge emotional toll on us, and in that sense, the word trauma is only fitting. Picture this. I mean, you're dealing with the heavy stuff, right? Leaving your roots behind, your family, friends, neighbors, students, your careers for which you worked so long and so hard, right? Then after a long and arduous journey that involved countless email exchanges, visa applications, explanations to people, or extreme silence in some cases, and secrecy due to safety concerns, you name it. So you arrive at a new country, a new institution, you meet new people, new everyday life with many different details to navigate. I mean, this is very, very difficult. So you have no time to process what just happened, right? This was my experience, actually. And here you are facing a maelstrom of feelings that are left unrecognized, unseen, unaddressed, even usually by yourself, right? I mean, frustration, resentment, anger, homesickness, fear, anxiety, you name it. So, however, I think unseen doesn't mean dormant. Uh, you carry heavy emotional baggage that weighs on you in the background while you have to dive into the job application scene, which brings its own set of challenges, even for colleagues who are born and raised in the US, right? So expectations are huge in that sense. So what can be done when I ask this question? I mean, I could just briefly give some preliminary answers. Forging meaningful connections with colleagues wherever you are, or obviously seeking support. Most importantly, your host institutions have resources, including counseling, legal assistance, and guidance on academic and personal matters. So, folks, please do not isolate yourself. Reach out and share your experiences, even traumatizing ones.
There's so much to be said on that topic, is that we're going to include it in the small group conversations at the end, and we're going to have a whole nother workshop specifically on mental health that will be announced in the coming weeks. So thank you for sharing that. We've had a number of questions come in the chat and the Q&A function. I'll pose one to Valerie from Sarat on the Q&A is, do you think most institutions would be willing to sponsor a visa for adjunct positions?
Not for adjunct positions, because those are only temporary positions, generally speaking, and they're part-time positions. So You could use your temporary work authorization to do an adjunct position, and it's a great way to network. Like if you're in a fellowship right now, is if you want to work for another university adjunct, because they're very, very part-time. So for instance, Harvard has the School of Continuing Education, and it's called the Extension School. And so a lot of their professors are adjunct, but it gives you a good networking opportunity, a good chance to be on campus. So no matter where you're located, you can find these types of opportunities, but they will not sponsor a visa. So there you're looking for a full-time position. And again, look at capacity and willingness.
Great. And I think maybe Azat, Zuhal, or Raza, one of you can talk more about, there was a question about the level of formality in speech and when not to use formal tone. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I was looking at the questions just now. So I think I think you need not be overly formal, but certainly I think you have to sound professional. Your email should and the language you use should display that, if you're an expert in a particular field, or if you're an academic, or if you are, a lecturer or a practitioner, your language should show that. I mean, it need not be too formal as we are. I mean, as at least I'm used to from South Asia, where we still use very archaic usages in writing formally, yours humbly and yours, etc. Not like that, but certainly you have to sound professional and someone who should sort of make a mark through the email. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. We're now going to turn to the second part of our presentation about connecting with people and resources, which I think will help answer your latest question, Raza, about we have to find information on vacancies. And if we have time after that, we'll return to some of the questions in the chat and also new questions coming in related to Kathy's topic. So I'm going to share my screen back to the PowerPoint and over to you, Kathy.
And I think you'll see that there's going to be a kind of building on the first part of the session today, and that indeed I think will speak to the questions that came up, even in terms of how quickly should one start looking for work if you're in this capacity. And I'll just say in brief that from the moment that scholars or practitioners arrive in our institution, we begin thinking about that plan, and already within the first months of being here, if it's the right cycle for looking for academic positions, we encourage and work with them on beginning to apply for jobs. So I'm really happy to be able to talk, in a very general sense about connecting with people and resources. And Carly, you can go to the next slide. We're going to change it up just a little bit, and that I'll frame a few ideas, and then we're going to turn right to our scholar experts to share from their own experience. Obviously, we've already spoken about the responsiveness of people in the dean's office or even the provost or the president to meet with you at a university. And I will echo that. I think that there's a lot of interest in engaging and understanding and trying to find ways to help network and support. Department heads as well are really critical for helping to try to navigate the new domain of potentially academia in the United States, and especially within your own discipline or interdiscipline, depending on your background and your training. And I would encourage, if the department is open to it, that you attend faculty meetings and you participate in the normal life of the department, because that's where the informal socialization and opportunity to create relationships with people who may serve as mentors, informal or formal, will actually happen. So when we host our faculty, our resident scholars and practitioners join the faculty and also join the governance process for our institute. In terms of mentors, we'll talk a little bit about this in more depth in a few minutes, but I think one of the things as you build relationships on and off campus for job hunting is to actually be really forward and ask for sample cover letters that get at the norms of whatever discipline or interdiscipline you're working in, because these cover letters are really a cultural document, and they're very different maybe here than they were in your home setting. And when we train our doctoral students to be on the market, quote unquote, to be searching for that job, usually we'll have a bank of cover letters that we have permission from for people who recently secured jobs to be able to show what those norms are. Should it never be longer than 2 pages? Or if it's shorter than 2 pages, will it be hard for you to convey all that's needed? And career services on campus, sometimes depending on the campus you're on, there may only be career services available for undergraduate students, but still there's a resource to get an outside read on your resume or your CV, even just for the copy editing function. If there are postdoctoral fellows supported at your university, often universities will have special staff or offices that support the ongoing job search for postdoctoral fellows, and that can be a really fruitful place. There are also specialized trainings that you'd want to take advantage of, and you will just need to reach out to your department head or other mentors to find out what are these resources that you can use to build your credentials and file. And I know that we haven't posted the key higher ed portals that are used at least in the social sciences and the humanities, and I believe they're quite common for the sciences. These are just 2 big portals, Academic Jobs Online and Chronicle of Higher Education. And I know Valerie mentioned also then looking at your target institutions and going to look at the searches there. We're a public university, and so we actually can't only list jobs on our own internal site. We have to demonstrate that we're listing our jobs far and wide, and especially in order to attract diverse candidates. So you would probably see a posting for a job at a university like ours in many places. But as Valerie mentioned, really working with your mentors, working with your department head, and getting a sense of what's really required within your application packet, and have very careful review by not just one, but by more than one person. So in most positions for tenure track lines, you don't only need the cover letter, which is quite honed and is very critical in even getting a look at a position, but you need that strong CV, which is representing the kinds of work that's needed for the position posted. Publications often are very heavily weighted in research positions. Teaching can be quite heavily weighted in teaching heavy positions. You'll likely be asked to also submit a research statement, a teaching statement, and in more recent years, a diversity, equity, inclusion, and sometimes anti-racist practice statement. And there, having been on many searches, that statement should be something that time and care is taken about, and actually you get feedback on, because that statement can sometimes be the thing that weighs into whether or not a person advances to getting an interview in a job. You also would want to get careful insight into any publications that you're posting, and sometimes an application will require that you submit course outlines. Very rarely these days do you see course evaluations needed, but sometimes those are required. So I want to open up to Raza first to weigh in, and then we're actually going to ask if all 3 of our experts, Raza, Zuhal, and Azat, would take a few minutes to weigh in. Carly, can you remind me, are we okay if they have about 5 minutes?
Let's try to keep this one to 3 minutes so we can get to the other slides.
Wonderful. So 3 minutes. So maybe if you both, at least 2 of you, can briefly weigh in on anything you might want to amplify. And certainly if you don't agree with something I framed, please state your other opinion as well.
No, thank you. So I can go first. I mean, no, I think you're absolutely right. The role of mentors is really vital. I mean, I've personally benefited from having some really thoughtful, well-connected and astute mentors who knew both people within the campus and, of course, in the larger higher education community. And that really works. And also, you can work out some of the details, So, for example, whenever I have considered applying for a job, I usually go to my mentors or my colleagues, senior colleagues who are far more, experienced than me, and we assess whether I should even be applying for this job or not. And I think that pre-screening really helps, and that pre-screening discussion also helps draft a cover letter that is so vital in this business. So I'll stop here, noting that we just have 3 minutes.
I can jump in for a brief note about the importance of joining associations and participating in national conferences. This is very important because most associations, they are actually functioning as the pool of job ads of their discipline. But in my case, it was a little bit difficult because I'm a sociologist, by training. But my research is a little bit, not a little bit, it's interdisciplinary. So I actually work in urban studies, Middle East studies, and Turkish Kurdish studies, etc. So it is both an advantage and a disadvantage, depending on the situation. It was an advantage because I could tailor my application package depending on the character of the job. So I had different fields to run in. And it might be a disadvantage because you might not fit in. So you might need to be a little bit strategic about your choices when it comes to membership and also national conferences, depending on the nature of your research. And membership dues might be a little bit high, so you might need to be cognizant of that as well.
Great, and we'll come back to more on associations in just a moment. So Zuhal, if you could just frame a few words, and then I'll keep the next section on my part brief so that you all have plenty to say.
I would like to share that sometimes like discipline-specific listservs are existing that like throughout the United States, people are posting their job positions, and you may ask your mentors whether they know any kind of like specific listserv for the scholars in your field. So you may also access the job positions through email notifications that come from multiple universities, even like non-academic job positions as well.
Thank you. So Carly, I think we can take the next slide back and actually speak a bit to associations and conferences. So we'll build on what we were talking about and note that we can't be comprehensive here because these associations and the conferences associated with them are very disciplinary specific. The cycle, the season, they vary quite a bit. So if you're in political science, your really important conferences might take place even before the autumn semester begins, or the International Association would take place in the spring semester. In social work, the field I'm in, it's autumn and spring, but there are also much smaller conferences, which are often quite productive in creating richer relationships that take place throughout the year. And in the STEM fields, the sciences, the summer is often quite an important time for specific STEM field conferences. As just was mentioned by Zuhal, you should definitely look into joining listservs. And again, these are going to be very diverse. So I would recommend you reach out to your mentors and faculty, colleagues within your university and within your department to identify what are the key listservs that they participate in. And then you should not feel shy about reaching out to the leadership of a specific association to talk about any specific training or supports they have for people who are newcomers who might be on the job market. I would consider joining more than one association, and this can be costly. So you could request from your department or the university, if they have the resources, to actually pay for the cost of your association membership, and also set aside resources for you to travel to conferences and to present. Some universities have strong supports in that regard. Others may have more limited support. So it will really depend on the site where you're located. And then one thing that I recommend is creating a spreadsheet or some kind of document, maybe a shared Google document with your mentors where you're taking notes and building out a calendar of conferences, because those cycles vary considerably. When our paper abstracts due, if you want to actually present, which are the best conferences to attend if you are going to do any preliminary interviewing, informal interviewing, and even just talking to your mentors about that practice of going to conferences and reaching out ahead of time to specifically meet with key people that are there. They may or may not have listed a job in that given year, but they might in the future. And you want to try to meet them face to face and share a bit about your background and your work and your interest in their institution. And then, I think some of this advice will vary depending on whether you are going for a tenure track position, visiting appointments, looking into postdoctoral fellowships that are funded with a particular project, or other fellowships that allow you to be in residence and just work on your own research. So I'm going to pause here. Carly, it's okay to take down the slide, and I'm going to turn first to Zuhal.
Thank you. That's really helpful to hear those tips. One thing that I would like to mention, especially for conferences, before going to conference, reaching out to people, and as well as after conferences, you meet people who come to your presentations, maybe ask some insightful questions. Please don't feel ashamed or like kind of reserved to reach out to them. Just reach out to them. And if you have an idea that you started to talk about, please make it like a preliminary work and propose something to collaborate further. The reason that I am sharing this, based on my experience, I joined a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and a couple of like professors joined my talk, and they show a genuine interest into the work. And after that, I reached out to them. It was a novel idea for my field. Why not we are creating some kind of like community circle together to be able to advance the research in this particular area? And it ended up creating a community circle, organizing a symposium together because they have the fund for it as well, which I did not have that fund at the moment. So please do reach out after the conferences based on your productive conversation in the conference space. This is quite helpful, and it will also result in further research collaborations and funding opportunities, as well as mentorship. One of those professors are my close mentor right now, which was very helpful in my job applications, reviewing some of my materials and writing me a reference letter as well. So it can go into many productive venues for you following up after the conferences. That is one thing that I can share from my experience.
That's wonderful. And I think we'll have Raza weigh in, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have much to add because both Azat and Zuhal have made very valid points. I mean, all I can say is that basically, I think a bit of rigor. I mean, I always tell, because now I'm in my master's classes, I also have to advise students on professional opportunities, and my standard line is that looking for a job is also a full-time job. I mean, especially in the US, because not just that you have to do adequate research, you have to tailor your resume for every job posting. You also have to have a very concise cover letter, and also keep these opportunities, networking, conferencing, associations, smaller groups. You have to be alert and make an extra effort to get involved. And I think there's no shortcut to that, unfortunately. Much as we think, I mean, maybe from after the initial stint, if you are supported by a certain group or a certain network or a certain nonprofit, thereafter, it is a lot of rigor and hard work. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Carly, I think we'll go to the last section here before open questions. Wonderful. And so we've been speaking about this since the beginning, and I think this is perhaps the area that I see the most need for host institutions to spend time, but not to be overly prescriptive, not to overly define who the mentors will be. There has to be a really good fit or some kind of resonance between the person who's come in residence and the local community, as well as an effort made to help connect and build a mentorship team that extends beyond the university where the scholar or practitioner might be staying and working. So, this is not only critical for the longer term process of trying to find a sustainable work, but also for just getting to know a new institution, a new community, and to grapple with some of what Azat was talking about with the trauma of transition, the experience of having left your home and left your livelihood and perhaps left family and friends and community. So, developing those close peers, mentors, friends, and people you can count on to reach out to if you just have a seemingly very basic question about what does it mean to look at this job ad, and it says there are minimum and preferred requirements. And quite honestly, you have to have someone who can tell you directly, if you do not meet the minimum requirements, you're not going to get a look at this job. And so you need to make sure that you really speak to these aspects of an application. It also helps to, your mentor team can familiarize you with the extraordinarily diverse landscape of higher ed in the United States. Even just to understand what Ivy League means or Ivy institutions is quite culturally constructed and also somewhat contested as higher ed changes. So the nature of a land grant public university, if the state is divesting from resources from that land grant, how much of a land grant is it? If they are gradually moving to a model where they're primarily relying on adjunct instructors, you need to understand that about the landscape of that particular institution or set of institutions. And your mentor team can expand your networks by many degrees, both on and off campus. And you honestly would have a hard time predicting, I think, as Raza just spoke to, and as Zuhal spoke to, who might be that pivotal person that really can help open a door that might have been closed to you. This whole process is both formal and informal, and that is probably the hardest thing to navigate. How to create those ties and relationships and understand that the job search process is extremely constrained by legal guidelines around who is considered to be qualified to interview, but also how do you portray your work in a way that's so compelling that you get a really careful look by the committee. And I think those kinds of nuances you can learn best and shape in conversation with mentors. Also that you would seek a diverse team of mentors rather than one main mentor. And I'll say this has been one of the challenges in our program, is that we have a relatively small number of people who are carrying out this work with the scholars that we host at the university. So I'm going to stop there and actually open up with Azat taking the lead here in responding to the ideas around mentoring and mentorship teams. And I'd love if you each could reflect on the extent to which the ways in which you found mentors useful, and then also what you would not do in your own mentoring, like things that you learned from your experiences here as you made the transition.
Sure. I mean, it was extremely helpful. But in my case, I was not assigned a formal mentor, but my connections acted as my unofficial mentors. Let me put it that way. So in that sense, I guess the initiative is very important, and sometimes it needs to be you who take the initiative. So in my case, it actually helped me to see the job hunt scene. They share their experiences and even some rumors about the job market. Unofficial, informal news and information about the availability of jobs and all. It was extremely helpful. And I was not a total outsider to US culture because I got my PhD in the United States, but in some cases, mentors might serve as cultural ambassadors, bridging the gap between the academic environment and the unfamiliar aspects of US life, American life, however defined. So in that sense, they might be extremely helpful as well. And obviously, and on par with my previous emphasis, mentors can provide emotional support during the transitional period, even though the nature of the relationship is mostly professional. But you may never know because we are talking about human beings at the end of the day.
Thank you. Zuhal, what might you offer in terms of what you thought worked the best in terms of mentorship and the kinds of things you would avoid actually in your own practice of mentoring?
So it's like pretty much like similar what Azat is mentioning. But one thing is kind of different. I completed my PhD in Turkey, so it's a different setting. Even if my master degree in United States, my PhD in Turkey, and my mentor helped me how I can like reframe my strength of my PhD in a different country. That's very important to communicate, especially in your cover letter, even like a couple of sentences, because it is very important for the selection committees, review committees to see this is strength rather than like, oh, this is like a PhD in a different country. So my mentor helped me to how to reframe it. And also other thing like the taking initiative, that's kind of very important because I didn't assign to any mentor as well. I reach out. And when I see a person that we have like some kind of conversation around the research or teaching ideas, I reach out to them, ask whether they might be willing to support me in some of my questions. And they were quite responsive. And some of the professors in my like 4 years ago, they said, hey, I have a former student. So maybe even inquiring about their former students who had landed jobs and getting examples from them. And one other thing is kind of beyond this, we started an advocacy program for our like discipline, trying to create a mentorship program for the early career researchers and scholars to be able to get like mentorship from the people, because in my field, I didn't find for myself. So let's say, why not we started this initiative in our field to be able to create a network for the people who can not have the access so far to the mentorship. So we create those community circle as a result of like being a part of an association in my field. This might be another thing to consider to be able to reach out to the people and start the initiative together. And what I would avoid is kind of like when reaching out the mentor, try to think about what are the critical questions. Do not like send like multiple emails with different isolated ideas. What do you want to get out of the time that you may spend with your mentor or in the email context, and try to come up with very targeted and intentional questions that they can help you with. And also this is also important to identification of who will be the right person to reach to. Some people will be strong in a sense that maybe in a like a research perspective. Some people can give you mentorship in the teaching perspective, and putting like intentional thoughts before reaching out was a critical point for me to be able to have the very productive conversation and support from my mentors.
Thank you. I think those were really critical inputs. And Raza, would you like to close out with some of your thoughts and advice around mentoring and mentorship?
Yes, I mean, I think Zuhal is absolutely correct that, and I think the PowerPoint also underscored the fact that one must not rely on a single mentor, but instead, have a diversified approach to mentorship as well. But I think I would also add a little bit here that often, within the campus resources, or, you find people who have been on search committees, who have been, on undertaking these tasks of recruitment. And sometimes they may or may not be professors, but they have a very rich experience on candidate selection, identification process, and they help you. I mean, they help you not through the fact that they can rig the system for your benefit, but actually they can help advise you on what kind of a resume, what kind of a cover letter is required for this particular vacancy. And I think that's critical. I mean, I keep on emphasizing that because, I mean, I applied for many jobs. I got many rejections. And often when I would look back, I saw that I was somewhat lazy with my cover letter, regurgitating the same one for a variety of jobs. I think that is something that's a thing that needs to be avoided. I know it takes extra time. It's tedious. It's very boring sometimes. You have like these 7 vacancies and 7 letters. Oh my God, you know, but unfortunately, it's 7 hours well spent. It also helps you sort of understand your own strengths and weaknesses better. It also helps you understand your resume and things like your teaching philosophy for those who are applying for teaching jobs. I mean, this is also increasingly now looked at, you know, the teaching statement or teaching philosophy. And once again, you know, even if you do a random online search, you'll realize that there's so much material out there, because often what happens is that we end up writing some of the things that the search committee is not interested in. They don't want to know that how passionate you are about teaching. You know, they want to know what exactly you bring to the classroom, what kind of skills, what kind of research and insights you bring to a diverse group of students and faculty members. And I think that is where you have to work a bit, highlighting the value added, you know. And I think for a lot of us who come from other countries, other cultures, there is sufficient space in the higher education sector. It may or may not be in the political field. I mean, that's a separate story. But certainly in the higher education sector, diversity is valued and welcomed and celebrated. So, you know, don't try and homogenize your experience like an American researcher or an American academic. Be yourself, be authentic, and at the same time see how are you going to add value to the larger research and intellectual culture of the place you are applying to.
I think that's a particularly positive and profound way to close out the formal remarks. Carly, would you like to host the discussion? Because I think you have a sense of timing.
Yes. I'd like to take about 5 to 10 minutes for some more Q&A directed to all of you. And then at about 2:20, we'll transition into our small group discussion. That's Eastern time. So in about 10 minutes, we'll transition to small group discussion. So I want to return to a question that was posted in the chat back in Valerie's section, but I think any one of our speakers could weigh in on this. If you've been applying for many positions that you believe you meet the minimum eligible requirements for, and you're not getting called back to an interview, and you don't know why, what do you do?
Yeah, so I think this is the application process. So I do a diagnostic with folks on this, because if you're not getting to the interview process, something is happening in the application process. So the first thing that I check for is I'll analyze your resume first, and I'll go through and I will look for those basic qualifications. And if you missed one, then I know this is the reason you weren't called in. The second thing that I'm going to look at is, are you hitting on the right keywords and the language? So sometimes you're looking at transferable skills and that sort of thing on what you're applying to. And so you have to adapt your resume a little bit. If I can't find that story quickly of like why you're qualified, again, remember, I am a low context person. If I don't see it in the first 10 seconds, you're out, right? And so then I'm looking for that story. If I get the story, then that's where I go in and I start evaluating for the strength of your resume and the competition. So usually I'll bring in about 10 candidates at that point. A lot of times that's where the cover letter then adds in more context. And so some people will use the strategy of, well, I put it in my cover letter. Well, I'm not scanning the cover letter, nor am I looking at the cover letter until I know you're qualified. So that's the first thing, is really looking at that. The second thing is looking at applying within that first 10 days. So if somebody applied, I've had folks apply, 60 days after it opens, and I know for sure they're not even looking at your resume at this point. So applying within that first 10 days, really essential. Then the third thing that I'm looking at in the application process is sometimes it's just a very competitive process. And this is where your networks help and a referral helps. So if you've got somebody that will speak up for you and say, hey, you really need to look at Raza because Raza is great, right? I will take, even if it wasn't in that first batch, I will take another look because this person told me they were great, right? And so they meet the basic qualifications, and that's when I will call them in. So those are the the things that I'm looking for. And I don't know if Kathy, you have, because you are looking at faculty positions, but you might have a different viewpoint.
I mean, I think it might differ based on kind of institution. At our public university, we actually do not look at a file more because somebody tells us that they're a great person and we should. So, and we do generally keep our openings. They have to be minimum of 2 weeks open. And generally they'll be open for a month and a half. We probably aren't getting the same enormous numbers of applications that Harvard would be getting or some of the other elite positions, but we're still, for positions in a range of disciplines, getting 65 to 125 applications. And depending on the ethos of the committee, I would say usually cover letters are read and CVs are skimmed. If they do not meet the minimum, if there's even one minimum qualification that's not met, it's gone. It actually legally cannot be looked at within our institution. So it's not about, oh, they were so amazing in this one category. Oh, but they didn't happen to have a PhD and it says a PhD is required. It doesn't matter. That person cannot be considered. Or as Valerie says, you'd have to close the search, tell everybody that it's going to be opened again, and everybody who applied for the job would have to apply again. So I think that's one thing that people may not understand. The legal parameters of search processes in higher ed can be extremely constraining. And depending on the metrics that a search committee uses to define what the minimum standard is for each of those minimum qualifications, you might feel like you met all the minimum qualifications, but you didn't have 10 pubs, you only had 5. And the minimum metric for that particular search committee was 10 within respected peer-reviewed journals. Or that if they say, we prefer that you've had postdoctoral experience, and you don't, but some other folks do, and the postdoctoral experience is really critical to securing federal funding for your research in the future, then even if you had everything else that was minimum, you still may not get an interview even in the first round. So it is a very culturally specific practice. This job search process in the United States is disciplinarily specific, and it's also specific to the United States. And, I am an anthropologist by training. I teach in a school of social work. I direct a human rights institute. I could not compete to get a job in anthropology. I tried for 8 years as a very qualified candidate. The field was just too crowded with anthropologists. And I so endorse what Raza said. Do not try to be someone else. Really, you must be yourself, because there ideally would be the right place for a fit. And I can just say that, this is why you need mentor teams, not only to help you shape that process, but to give you support when you're feeling discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point, Kathy. On that topic of how different each discipline is, we got a question that was answered in the chat by Valerie about where to find templates for a cover letter or a CV, but I think some of those generic online templates might not give discipline-specific information. So could one of you talk a bit about how to find out what the norms in your discipline are for application materials? I, for one, from my personal experience, I literally obtained a copy of my mentor's CV and modeled my CV off of his. And I think that goes back to the mentor.
So getting cover letters is a little harder than looking at people's CVs. We all look at CVs online when we're getting to know people that we might want to connect with. But I would just very openly ask people that are in your department if they're willing, or if they know anybody who would be willing to share sample cover letters and read more than 1 or 2. And get a sense of, do you talk about your publications up front first? If it's a teaching position, do you foreground the teaching first and then the pubs after? Do you kind of downplay your publication, orientation? At many what are called teaching-oriented universities now, the publication expectations are really rising. So you actually have to show good progress there. But those things are so specific to whether it's mathematics or sociology or this, School of Business, that you really need to rely on your local mentor networks.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll outline that in the job description of what the expectation is for the cover letter. Like these are the things that we want to see in the cover letter. So make sure that you're reading those descriptions and the application process carefully, because a lot of times I've thrown things out because they haven't read it carefully, and they didn't like, I just recently had a search where we were, a cover letter, we asked for where they saw our organization going, not what their past was. And so, we had a lot of people that did traditional cover letter. And so we were like, well, you didn't answer the question we wanted in this. And it was in the description. So make sure you look at that for the cover letter. And then I would just add in there that one of the things that stands out to me in candidates in a cover letter versus like the resume is when somebody tells me that they really are interested in the organization and there's a specific reason. So a lot of people will start their cover letter, with Harvard, like, well, it's Harvard. So, it's the top university in the world. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. Like everybody knows that everybody's applying here. What is it about Harvard? Is it a particular faculty and their research like influenced you and it brought you in some different directions? To Kathy's point, like we don't want necessarily the same, homogenous, but we want to know that you really want us and not just because of the name.
Great. I'm gonna pose one more question that I think can have a short answer and then transition into the small groups where we can hopefully answer some of the remaining questions. So Syed asked, can holding workshops in the US be considered teaching experience? So Valerie and Kathy, would you talk about what the term teaching experiences tends to mean and what counts?
So yeah, go Kathy, you go ahead.
I was just going to say it would count for the opportunity that you're presenting and being effective in diverse spaces. But for most jobs that require teaching, you're going to need to show, some won't even take a teaching assistant experience as meeting the minimum standards. So that's really going to vary based on the position. And you can actually reach out to the search chair and ask to clarify what they mean by this. Oftentimes it will say you must have teaching experience, or you have to read the words so carefully. If it says evidence of promise in teaching, then perhaps the workshop is enough.
Yeah, that I was going to say, you have to look at the job description because again, it goes down to those basic requirements where it falls in the job description. So if you're looking at basic requirements and it says that, you need 5 to 7 years of teaching experience, a workshop is not considered teaching experience. However, if you have, let's say it's a principal researcher and there's some teaching, and I think Raza had said that, where there's some teaching in it, a workshop might serve as that, and you can frame it under teaching experience. And then the other thing too is if it's teaching experience in a particular area, you can show some of those transferable skills, but add in the workshops to your teaching experience. Like if it's an area of expertise that maybe you're developing and you want to bolster that teaching experience.
Great, thanks so much. So now we're going to transition into small breakout groups. So we're going to stop the recording here so that you all can talk freely in small groups. I think that is most of everyone. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us for these 2 hours today. I know that there is so much more we could have talked about. This is just the beginning. For all of our presenters, if you could share in the chat the best way for people to stay in contact with you, if you would be comfortable sharing your email or your LinkedIn or your website, and hopefully we can forge some meaningful connections. And the recording and the PowerPoint and select notes and resources, such as the websites shared earlier in the chat, will be up on our website, onwardsproject.org, over the coming week or two. And let's see if I had anything else I was going to say. Oh, our next workshop will be on December 8th on applying for non-academic jobs, such as transitioning into industry jobs or think tanks or something that's not at a university. So you can register for that at onwardsproject.org, and we'll have a number of other upcoming workshops in the new year that we'll announce. So best of luck to all of you and have a great rest of your day.